Welcome back, everyone. Ready to jump into another deep dive. This week, we're tackling the PortalFuse Weekly Security Update Report.
Always a good time, especially this week.
It seems particularly dense.
You could say that. We've got some pretty serious vulnerabilities in Edge to discuss, a non-security Windows 10 update.
But still a major update.
Right, with a long list of fixes, but as always, it has its own quirks. Oh, and of course, a dynamic update for Windows 11 and Server 2025, and...
A regular reminder about servicing stack updates.
You know it.
Okay, so maybe we start with those critical vulnerabilities in Microsoft Edge.
Yeah, that's probably a good place to start.
The PortalFuse Weekly Security Update Report flags 3 new CVEs that are impacting the Chromium-based version.
2 of them, CVE 2025-0612 and CVE 2025-0611, those actually stem from vulnerabilities in the Chromium open source software itself.
And the third one, CVE 2025-21262. That's a spoofing vulnerability. So that basically means that it could allow an attacker to misrepresent the user interface.
Potentially tricking users into interacting with malicious content.
Yeah, it's kind of a scary thought.
It is. It is. You know, it's a reminder that even though Microsoft is the one developing and maintaining Edge, because it relies on Chromium, we inherit any security issues from that project as well.
Yeah.
Luckily, updating to Edge build 132.0.2957.127 addresses all 3.
So that's good news.
It is. It is.
So moving on to Windows 10, we've got KB5050081.
A major update.
A major update, but it's a non-security update.
Correct.
But still with a pretty substantial amount of changes. Like they're rolling out the new Outlook app for Windows with this.
Yeah, the new Outlook app is a pretty big change, but I mean, at this point, it's mostly cosmetic. Your existing settings and defaults are still there, so hopefully it should be a pretty smooth transition for users. But I think for us, the most important part of this update is really in the bug fixes.
For sure. Like they finally addressed that capture service and Snipping Tool freezing issue.
It's about time.
I know.
Yeah.
So many people have been having issues with that.
Yeah, a lot of frustrated users.
Yeah. And then there were some really important fixes for USB audio devices.
Yeah, specifically the ones that use older drivers.
Like USB 1.0.
Exactly. There were a lot of reports of these devices just not working properly. So hopefully those fixes will resolve a lot of those issues.
Absolutely. And what about those USB camera recognition failures? Those have been frustrating.
Oh, yeah. Those started popping up after the January security update, but thankfully those are addressed as well.
Oh, good, good.
But KB5050081 isn't all sunshine and roses. There are a few known issues highlighted in the PortalFuse Weekly Security Update Report that we should probably talk about.
Okay, let's hear it.
So the first one, and probably the one that'll have the most impact for some folks, is a potential failure of the OpenSSH service after you install KB5000081.
Oh, wow. That could be a major disruption for anyone who relies on OpenSSH.
For sure, especially those using it for remote administration or automated tasks.
Exactly.
Luckily, the PortalFuse Weekly Security Update Report does include a very detailed PowerShell workaround. It involves updating permissions for specific directories, and that should resolve the issue.
Okay, that's good.
The second known issue is a potential conflict with a very specific version of the Citrix session recording agent.
Okay, which one?
Version 2411.
2411.
Yeah. So if you happen to have this particular version installed, the Windows 10 update might fail.
Oh, wow.
The PortalFuse Weekly Security Update Report basically recommends that you consult the Citrix documentation for a workaround, which is a good reminder to always check for those compatibility issues before you roll out any updates, especially in complex environments.
Yeah, it's good advice. What's the third issue?
The third one is, well, more of a nuisance than an actual problem.
Okay.
After you install this update, or actually any update from January 14th onward, you might see some harmless error messages in the Windows Event Viewer related to sgrmbroker.exe.
sgrmbroker.exe.
Yeah. Basically, the service is defunct. Microsoft Defender doesn't use it anymore. But it can still generate these error messages, which clutter up the event log. But the PortalFuse Weekly Security Update Report, very helpfully, provides the command prompt steps to disable the service if you want to get rid of those messages.
Good to know. So we've talked about bug fixes, we've talked about the known issues. What about installation options for KB5050081?
Well, it's available through all the usual channels, Windows Update, the Business Catalog, and Server Update services. But there is one important caveat for devices that are still running older LCUs.
Okay.
They'll need to install a specific standalone SSU, KB5031539, before they apply KB5050081 and 01.
Right. Those servicing stack updates, they're so important. Speaking of which, let's move on to the dynamic update for Windows 11 and Windows Server 2025, KB5050758.
Yeah,
And this one is all about improving the setup binaries, right?
that's right.
The ones that are used for feature updates.
Exactly.
What's interesting about this one is it's available through the Microsoft Update Catalog and Server Update services, but not through regular Windows Update. And no prerequisites or restart required for this one.
Nope. And it replaces that previous dynamic update, KB5047134.
Got it.
It's good to see that they're really trying to make these updates as painless as possible.
Yeah.
Because really, dynamic updates are all about ensuring a smoother, more reliable experience when we get those feature updates down the line. So it's great that they're relatively straightforward to deploy.
Yeah, for sure. So it seems like Microsoft is really focusing on streamlining that whole update experience, especially with these dynamic updates that sort of work behind the scenes. But before we move on, I kind of wanted to circle back to KB5050081 for a minute, because that potential OpenSSH service failure, I mean, that seems like it could have a pretty big impact,
It could.
especially for folks who rely on that, for automation
Oh, yeah.
or remote management of their systems.
For sure. Imagine if you've got a whole bunch of automated deployments or config management tasks, and those are all running through OpenSSH. This update could really just bring everything to a screeching halt.
Yeah, if you're not ready for it.
Exactly. And then you've got the workaround, which involves modifying permissions using PowerShell,
Right.
which might add another layer of complexity for anyone who's not as familiar with working in that environment.
It's a good point.
It's just another good reminder that even though these are non-security updates, they can still have unintended consequences.
Yeah.
And it really drives home the importance of testing.
Absolutely.
Thorough testing in a staging environment before you roll out any updates to production.
A little bit of testing up front can save you a lot of headaches.
Oh, for sure. And potential downtime.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of potential headaches, that conflict with the Citrix session recording agent, version 2411.
Right.
That's another one to keep an eye out for.
It is. It's a very specific conflict, but if you happen to be one of the unlucky few who are affected,
Yeah.
it could mean the Windows 10 updates just completely fails. The PortalFuse Weekly Security Update Report recommends that you check the Citrix documentation for that workaround. Hopefully that'll provide you with a clear solution.
Hopefully.
It's a good example of how important it is to really keep track of all the different software versions that you're running in your environment. You might think that something like a specific recording agent wouldn't have any impact on your ability to apply updates.
You're right.
But as you can see,
It can have a ripple effect.
it can.
Speaking of interconnectedness, the PortalFuse Weekly Security Update Report also mentions that KB5050081 includes a bunch of other bug fixes and improvements that are worth mentioning.
Oh, yeah.
Like they addressed an issue that was causing virtual memory depletion, which obviously could lead to application failures and system instability.
That was a critical one. I mean, virtual memory management is fundamental to the way that your system performs.
For sure.
So if applications are constantly running out of memory, that can lead to crashes, slowdowns, data corruption.
Yeah, and lots of problems.
Yeah. And then they also included a fix for NFC reader failures,
Okay.
which were happening after multiple POS scans,
Point of sale.
Point of sale, exactly. This is a big one for retail environments that rely on NFC for contactless payments.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a good example of how, a seemingly minor bug can have a pretty major impact on very specific workflows. Like imagine a checkout line. Everything comes to a grinding halt because the NFC reader just decides to stop working.
Not good.
No, not good at all. So this fix should definitely help ensure that transactions go more smoothly.
And a better customer experience as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
So beyond those specific bug fixes, they also added support for the GB 88030-2022 amendment, which, just to refresh everyone's memory, that's a character encoding standard.
For Chinese text.
For Chinese text, exactly.
Yeah, that's a good addition for anyone who's working with international users and organizations, anyone who's dealing with Chinese language content.
Right.
It's just going to ensure that the text displays correctly and you avoid those potential compatibility issues.
It sounds like Microsoft really put a lot of work into addressing a bunch of different issues with this update,
They did.
even though it's not a security-focused update.
It really highlights the importance of those quality of life improvements. Obviously, security is paramount,
Of course.
but a stable and reliable system is really just as crucial for a positive user experience.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So I think we've pretty thoroughly explored KB5050081. Let's switch gears and talk a bit about KB50758, the dynamic update for Windows 11 and Windows Server 2025. You mentioned earlier that these dynamic updates are all about improving those setup binaries that are used for the future feature updates. Can you kind of just elaborate on that a little bit? What exactly are setup binaries, and why is it so important to keep them updated?
Sure, yeah. So those setup binaries, they're essentially the core files that are responsible for running that entire installation process during a feature update. They basically contain all the instructions and logic that guide the update from start to finish.
So it's kind of like the instruction manual.
Exactly. And, just like any other piece of software, those instructions, they can have errors, they can have inefficiencies. So keeping them updated ensures a smoother, more reliable, and, potentially even a faster feature update experience.
Got it.
And it can also help to reduce those compatibility issues that might arise from outdated installation routines.
So it's kind of like preventative maintenance.
Yeah, exactly. By proactively updating the setup binaries, we're reducing the risk of encountering problems during those big feature updates, which can be pretty disruptive if things go wrong.
Yeah, for sure. So it's all about minimizing downtime and making sure that, when those new features come out, the transition is smooth for the users.
Precisely. And thankfully, these dynamic updates, they're usually handled automatically through the Microsoft Update Catalog or server update services.
Right.
So most users won't even know that it's happening.
Oh, that's good.
But they will benefit from the increased stability and reliability.
It's good that Microsoft is making these behind-the-scenes improvements, even if they don't always get the same, fanfare as the big feature releases.
I agree. I think it really shows their commitment to continuously improving the entire Windows ecosystem.
Yeah.
And for us as system admins, it makes our jobs a little bit easier.
I'll never say no to that. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the PortalFuse Weekly Security Update Report, what are your, top takeaways? What should our fellow system admins really be paying attention to this week?
I think the biggest priority this week is patching those critical edge vulnerabilities.
Right?
Because those do have the potential for some pretty serious exploits.
Yeah.
So getting those updates rolled out quickly is essential.
Absolutely. And even though KB5050081 isn't a security update, those known issues, especially the potential OpenSSH service failure, that could have a big impact on some workflows.
It could.
So definitely careful testing and planning are going to be crucial before deploying this one.
Agreed. And for those of you running Windows 11 or Windows Server 2025, be aware of that dynamic update, KB5050758, and, what it's doing, improving those setup binaries for those feature updates.
Right.
It might be more behind the scenes, but it is going to contribute to a more stable and reliable update experience in the future.
Yeah. So stay vigilant, test thoroughly, and keep those systems updated.
Always good advice.
As always, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the PortalFuse Weekly Security Update Report. We'll be back next week with more insights and analysis to help you navigate the ever-changing world of Microsoft systems. And they also included a fix for NFC reader failures.
Oh, right.
Which were happening after multiple POS scans.
Yeah, point of sale, that's a big one for retail environments that rely on NFC for those contactless payments.
For sure.
It's a good example of how even a seemingly minor bug can have a pretty big impact on very specific workflows.
Absolutely.
Imagine a checkout line and everything comes to a screeching halt.
Oh, yeah.
Because the NFC reader just stops working.
Yeah, not good.
Not good at all.
Definitely not a good customer experience.
Exactly. So this fix should help ensure smoother transactions and hopefully a better customer experience.
For sure. And then beyond those specific bug fixes, they've also added support for the GB8830/2022 amendment.
Right.
Which, for those who might not remember, that's a character encoding standard that's used for Chinese text.
It is, and that's definitely a welcome addition for international users and organizations that work with Chinese language content.
For sure.
It's just going to ensure that, text displays correctly and we can avoid those potential compatibility issues.
So it sounds like Microsoft really put a lot of effort into addressing, all sorts of different pain points with this update.
Yeah, definitely.
Even if it's, not primarily focused on security.
It really just reinforces the importance of those quality of life improvements. Security is paramount, but we can't forget about those things that contribute to a stable and reliable system.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, that is just as crucial for, a positive user experience.
Right, for sure. So I think we've pretty thoroughly explored KB5050081. Why don't we move on to KB5050758, the dynamic update for Windows 11 and Windows Server 2025.
Sure.
And you mentioned earlier that, these dynamic updates are all about improving those setup binaries that are going to be used for future updates. Can you maybe just elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah.
What exactly are setup binaries, and why is it so important to keep them updated?
Yeah, so those setup binaries are basically the core files that are actually responsible for, the whole installation process during a feature update.
Right.
They essentially contain all the instructions and the logic that guide the update from start to finish.
So they're like the instruction manual for the whole thing.
Exactly. And just like any other software, those instructions, they can have errors, they can have inefficiencies.
Right.
And so by keeping them updated, we ensure a much smoother, more reliable, and potentially even a faster feature update experience.
And it can also help to mitigate any compatibility issues, right?
That's right. That's right. The compatibility issues that might arise from those outdated installation routines.
So it's kind of like preventative maintenance for future updates.
Yeah, exactly. You're exactly right. By proactively updating those setup binaries, we're significantly reducing the risk that we're going to encounter problems during those major feature updates, which, as we know, can be really disruptive if things go wrong.
Absolutely. So it's really all about minimizing downtime and then making sure that when those new features do come out, the transition is smooth for our users.
Precisely. And luckily, these dynamic updates are usually handled automatically through the Microsoft Update Catalog or server update services. So most users won't even be aware that it's happening.
Oh.
But, they'll benefit from the increased stability and the reliability.
It's great that Microsoft is making these behind-the-scenes improvements, even if they don't necessarily get as much attention as the big feature releases, right?
I think so. I think it's a testament to their commitment to continuously improving that whole Windows ecosystem.
For sure.
And for us as system administrators, it definitely makes our lives a bit easier.
I'll never say no to that. So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive into the PortalFuse weekly security update report, what are your, key takeaways?
Yeah, so I think the top priority for everyone this week is to patch those critical edge vulnerabilities. I mean, they have the potential for some really serious exploits. So getting those updates rolled out as quickly as possible is essential.
For sure.
And even though KB5050081 is not a security update, those known issues, particularly that potential OpenSSH service failure, that could have a pretty big impact on certain workflows.
Yeah, for sure.
Careful testing and planning are absolutely crucial before you deploy this one.
Absolutely.
And for anyone who's running Windows 11 or Windows Server 2025, just be aware of that dynamic update, KB5050758, and it's really all about improving those setup binaries for future feature updates.
Yeah.
It might be more of a behind-the-scenes improvement, but it will contribute to a more stable and reliable update experience down the line.
Yeah.
So,
stay vigilant, test thoroughly, and keep those systems updated.
As always, solid advice.
Right. So stay vigilant, test thoroughly, and keep those systems updated.
As always, solid advice.
Absolutely. And as always, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the PortalFuse Weekly Security Update Report.
It's been fun.
We'll be back next week with more insights and analysis.
We're deep dives
to help you navigate this crazy world of Microsoft systems.